Hey, you all, welcome to Screen University. This is another episode of Screen University Talks, and today with me I have Hemant Sangepu, who is going to talk about David Fincher. David Fincher is almost every film fanatic's favorite director, and there are many reasons why different people like him, and different people like him for different reasons. One of my favorite reasons is the kind of characterization that he creates on screen. If you ask me, I would say Gone Girl was my favorite film of his, and Rosamund Pike in that film has created such an impression in my mind that I have never forgotten her, and I don't think I ever will. Even if Rosamund Pike plays the most sweetest, the cutest, and the most beautiful, jolly, lovely speaking, soft spoken woman, I will always be scared of her because that is what David Fincher has done to us, and that is what he has done to her. So over to Hemant. So Hemant,
Hi.
uh, welcome to Screen University. I think this is our first time. We've been planning this for a very long time now.
Sorry,
Finally, looks
been
like
calling you. Yeah,
yeah, looks like it finally worked out.
yeah.
Anyway, so let's tell us about why David Fincher is your favorite director.
Um, well, ever since I started watching movies, like watching in the sense, literally trying to understand cinema in terms of a language, right? Cinematic. There is something called a cinematic grammar, visual language. There's a lot of things Fincher films can, you can study a lot from Fincher's film, especially he is known to be very obsessive with perfection in terms of everything he so in that aspect he's a very visual director, like if he wants you to feel, if the actor is feeling claustrophobic, he'll make sure you also feel that.
You also feel claustrophobic.
Yeah,
Got it.
he'll make sure that if the actor is character is vindicated, right? He uses all these techniques masterfully, especially the way he works around with his framing, movement, color, and lighting. And that's when I started realize, oh, it's not just a piece of dialogue which someone utters on screen. There's a lot goes behind the scenes that makes everybody in the auditorium feel like, wow, this is something else, right? And and also I think the choice of subjects, like he gets into very dark subjects, right?
Correct.
Gets into your psyche. He's a very, I feel he's a very observational person. Like he observes a lot, and his observation, you can see it the way he constructs a scene. Every little moment he captures, and I think that has had, not in the first second view, but if you watch his movies again and again, like you don't want to watch
Correct.
those movies when you're alone and watch them again and again. But I think if you take Seven, or I think Social Network. So yeah, I started, like, I enjoyed his movies, not knowing what was happening. Like, I just enjoyed it. It gave me such a uh, involvement. That's the word I want to use. That he'll make you involved in his storytelling with the
Correct.
cinematic techniques. So yeah.
Correct. So a good segue into this is that see, when we talk about David Fincher's camera technique, there are various styles of filmmaking. Now there is the old-fashioned way where Alfred Hitchcock के जमाने में जब there were no modern rigs, there was no dolly, just they had to lay tracks and then move the camera. In
Yeah.
those days, a lot of uh, panning was used. Okay, just pan the camera. They used to have that handle, and
Correct.
they panned from here to there. Any old movie you take, for example, take Hindi, Telugu, or any English old movie before 60s and before 70s. If you wanted to show a village, you start from the mountain
Yeah.
and then slowly you establish the village in one shot with panning. Okay, that is one zamana. Then after that, what happened? Modern techniques, started. coming in. And then in 70s, I think 80s, Stanley Kubrick introduced the Steadicam.
Correct.
And then you saw that in Shining, there is that
Yeah.
little boy cycling,
Iconic shots.
Johnny cycling, and that entire carpeted area, ekdam psychologically mind-bending work with camera only. There is
Exactly.
no dialogue there,
There is no dialogue,
only camera.
no gimmicks.
And then the next generation came, 90s onwards, where masters like David Fincher, if you are standing, the camera is at your chest and neck level. If you are sitting, then the camera will just a little bit, they will wait.
Yeah,
If the guy sits, if the character sits, the camera will also sit with him.
exactly.
Like, for example, picking up a phone, first they put it like this, then with the receiver, the frame moves. That is fucking amazing, man. That is the... And when by the time he made Social Network is a kind of film where there is a lot of dialogue,
Correct.
verbose, and
Yeah.
it was written by Aaron Sorkin. It means that it has to be dialogue based. That man cannot, he's a genius, but his strength is dialogues.
Right.
So Aaron Sorkin had this, very unique way of shooting his previous TV show, which was The West Wing,
Correct.
which is the walk and talk. Like, there is continuous dialogue between people, and if they are walking, the camera is walking with them.
Yeah.
And those techniques of moving the camera with the character, I think David Fincher has mastered that over the years.
Yeah. So a couple of points I want to reiterate. Like when you talk about Alfred Hitchcock, then to Stanley Kubrick, then to Steven Spielberg, masters of blocking and framing, right? They know how to block it, how to move the camera, and all that stuff. What David does is, it's those minute moments which you won't even notice, but they will have that impact subconsciously. That impact, you'll not know what's happening. Like, as you said, slight pan, slight tilt up. And I mean, in one of the blogs I've gone across, and I found out that, how he does that. I think that's the reason why he takes so many takes. He's like that, very obsessed.
People get irritated.
Like I heard that, the opening sequence in Social Network, the breakup sequence, they took 99 takes. And I think the reason for that is you see this well orchestrated, well coordinated movements. Like nothing is going which is not in his brain. He wants you to go exactly like that, exactly at that speed, with that momentum and rhythm. So I think for that it needs a lot of rehearsals, lots of coordination, and maybe that's, and he does a lot of post work. Like his editor, I don't know, I want to sit in that room with his editor to see how that guy is working, because there's tons and tons of footage. And one interesting thing I want to bring up is I got to know that he shoots in 8K but uses only 4K.
Oh,
I think that allows him to use those slight tilt ups, slight pans, if at all he missed it in his original shooting. So that's a lot of post work, and
I want that computer which is processing that 8K footage.
So, and the other thing about Social Network, which I really liked, was I love Aaron Sorkin and his dialogue. Must dialogue buzzy goes on and off, and he will bury you with his dialogues. So if you take it, if a screenwriter like Aaron Sorkin is on board, you know that it's going to be very audible, like picture. He's more like the rhythm of dialogue and all that, right? Fincher is a more of visual director, and when you combine both of them, it's magic. Right?
It's magic, absolute magic.
Sitting and talking is probably the most difficult scene, in my view, to shoot very engagingly. And the way he shoots those, boardroom scenes, or I think my favorite scene is obviously the breakup scene, the initial scene between Mark and Jessica, and also that guy when he freezes the bank account and Mark calls him, and his psychotic girlfriend, burns something, and that scene, everything. So yeah, I mean, he is something. he's really amazing when it comes to. I think Coen brothers also do amazing job when it comes to two people talking across the table.
Yeah, Coen Brothers is a different, episode altogether. We will because that's a different science.
Yeah,
I want to do an episode especially on Coen Brothers. Why don't we prepare for that next time?
sure. Yeah,
And so about retakes, I read somewhere that the reason why Fincher does so many retakes is that, according to him, he said, I think by 13th or 17th something retake, by 17th retake, the actor loses the sense of vanity,
right.
and then his actual performance comes out,
And he surrenders.
and he surrenders. Then he's
Like, bhai tu kar le, tu jo bhi.
and I'm just wondering if people get irritated and don't dare. Is it not true their first few takes give their best performance and then people start slowly losing interest in that?
Yeah, I mean that's a very debatable subject because there are a class of directors. Like if you listen to Scorsese or Spielberg, they say instinctively जो आता है ना, like couple of takes में, that's the actor's best most of the time. Like if they want something else, they can go it. But I think with Fincher, as we discussed, he has everything in his mind and he wants you to move exactly like that. And for that, sometimes coordination, actor ka reaction, and he shoots with multiple cameras. So captures with multiple cameras, and just imagine those group actors or the people who are walking around in that, they got to walk every time. Right?
It seems like a very tiring affair. So let's move on to the next. We'll go film by film, okay?
Yeah.
Obviously, we'll start with your favorite, which is what, Seven, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, why don't you tell us about Seven and what is unique about Seven and Fincher's style in Seven?
So Seven, I think that's when I started, exploring this guy. Who made this movie? Like, actually, I think I started watching Fincher's movies very lately, and before that, I already watched Garshana, and there is a famous climax scene and the box scene. I was like, what a scene, yaar, in Garshana. And then when I watched Seven, I realized, अरे यार ये तो इसने यहाँ से उठाया ये.
Never trust in Desi director. It's always possible that always take every great scene with a pinch of salt.
So yeah, I think the thing about Seven is the mood and the tone of the movie. It's such a dark subject, and the lighting and the mood in the movie is like the rain background. Every time you go outdoor, it's raining, it's damp outside, and he doesn't show the villain until the last act, yet keeps you engaged. It doesn't show you how the crime is happening. He only shows you the post crime scenes, and those are like very unpleasant scenes, but he shoots it with such finesse that like, wow, this is something else. Especially he gets you involved from the opening credits only. The famous opening credits. I've never seen such a haunting and a disturbing opening credits than Seven. And I think the usage of light and camera and the specific sound design in Seven, I think after third view, I was like, this is something else. And to quote some scenes, especially the climax, obviously the what's in the box scene, and ironically, that's the only movie where he has used like 4 to 5 scenes of handheld. He doesn't use handheld. He's more of, as we know, like more of smooth,
systematic, yes.
And this guy. But yeah, in Seven he uses that, and even in the climax scene, for Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt, it's handheld, and for Kevin Spacey, it's tripod stable shots. So I think with just camera, he'll show you who is having an upper hand, who is having a lower hand, and what the character is feeling, get into the psyche of the character. So yeah, I mean, I think he's a master of dark crime thrillers. There's no doubt. I mean, nobody can touch him in that aspect. And yeah,
Good. So the next film I want to talk to you about is Fight Club. The first rule of Fight Club is let's talk about Fight Club.
yeah,
There is very little that has there's a lot that has been said about the film. Very less remains for us to discuss. But let me tell you what impresses me about the Fight Club. When I saw Fight Club for the first time, honestly, in Telugu like they say, "Adekaledu." I didn't get the gist at all.
not you.
Uh,
Nobody ever.
Nobody did. Nobody did. And one of my friends rightly pointed out that 90% of his films are based on books. That means they all fall under the adapted screenplay category.
Right.
Okay, what the writer was thinking, original writer was thinking, is a different.
Yeah.
It's a different game altogether. But adopting those things, such complex subjects to the screen. Now, tell me, how can you show Tyler Durden on screen, man? I mean, just it's mind-boggling. Those see, first of all, Brad Pitt. I think that body is the best ever a male body has ever looked. I mean, if like for example, look at me. I am kind of overweight. If that's an aspiration, man. That's how you should look. That style, that roughness. Oh my God. That see again, we come back to the same critical central point of characterization.
Right.
The way he characterizes, the way he what comes out on screen versus what's in his mind, I think there is barely any difference.
Yeah, I think what you said is correct, right? When it comes to Fight Club, I remember first time watching it, and I was wow, something, but I didn't get what was it. Like, something is happening, but
Something is happening. Okay, it is awesome.
Arey,
Twist,
yaar,
last में twist जबरदस्त है बस.
I think it's his most flashy cinematic techniques he has used in Fight Club. All other movies are plain and simple, simple stuff. But here he uses lots of in terms of editing style, which he used, like flashy editings, and obviously he uses a lot of CGI in his films. But those CGI you won't notice. But in Fight Club, you do notice that kind of stuff. And it comes to, I think, as everybody, like all Fincher fans will agree, that he's a master of deception, and
Absolutely.
no better than Fight Club to explain how he deceives everybody, that even the protagonist deceives himself in the whole process. And I think visually it had a lot of impact. Like, wow, ye to something I've never seen visuals of, something a man is thinking inside himself, and to show it on screen, like what is he going through.
That's exactly what I said. And especially that film has undertones of anti-capitalism. Like, that's a whole theme, right? Consumerism, anti-capitalism, and to bring that frustration on screen, it's just a magical art. And when the twist is unveiled in the end, that was when I realized that, अरे boss, this is something else. ये अपने को एक बार से होने वाला काम नहीं है. You have to watch it multiple times to actually understand. I gave a long gap between first viewing and latest viewing. There was a very long gap, 5-6 years. I think I gave a very long gap. Then see, as you grow, your tastes change.
Right.
Your taste develops. And then you will start appreciating some things a little more than you ever did.
Correct. You become more receptive towards most of the stuff. I think when I first saw Fight Club, that's when I realized that there is a lot of cinema that I need to watch, and there are a lot of great films like this. And just keep an open mind and start watching, like, no matter who did it, which language or whatever it is. But I think Fight Club, I think the sound design in Fight Club too is it's amazing, right? You get that feel. I recommend watching it with good headset if you're watching at home, and you just get immersive experience. And that's what he does, right? He gives you that immersive experience to the audience, no matter whatever he does, whether it's a period drama, it's a crime thriller, or is it something psychological thriller. Like when I was doing a short film, like it's more like a psychological thriller. I tried. I mean, but it's not easy. I mean, I'm telling you, knowing a technique, reading it, it's different, and executing it, it's an altogether a different ball game. And but I think over a period of time, you understand, the grammar of the cinema. But he's something else. I remember Aaron Sorkin. Aaron Sorkin's new film came, right, like the Chicago Tribune.
Yes,
And
Chicago Trial 7. Yes,
yeah,
Trial of Chicago 7.
yeah. So someone asked him, like, you work with David and some of the other Ron Howard, some great filmmakers. Did you learn something from them, like in terms of directing, because you're basically a screenwriter? And did that help? Is that right? Being on the set with David Fincher, it's like a freshman attending a PhD class, right? So that is my level, and he's a PhD professor teaching you something. Tell me how much you can take it. That's the level he is at.
I think one of the things about the Fight Club is that it was way ahead of its time.
Yeah, it was.
And you can see 90s films. If you can look at, you can see, if you see the footage, you can tell that this is a film from the 90s. But if you look at Fight Club, you will not say that. If somebody tells you Fight Club was made in 2010, you will believe it.
You'll believe it, right?
Because there is that, futuristic and somehow what do you call it? It's not post-apocalyptic, but there is some different feel to it that makes it look postmodern or something out of this world, not the usual 90s things that you get. It was 99, I think. It's still towards the edge of towards 2000, but still it was way ahead of its time.
So that's what I don't understand, like how these guys, when you actually read that novel, and there's no way you can imagine that translate into screen like this, right? I mean, it's just sheer brilliance of the director, which I think you need a lot of command to execute such stuff.
No, definitely you need a very good. You need to first run that movie in your head like 100 times.
Yeah, that's what a director.
That itself, I think, is a monstrous task. I don't know how he accomplishes that, and that's why he and we are his fans. All right. Yeah. So the next film I want to talk about is I think Zodiac.
Right.
So Zodiac, see, I have seen the film a very long time ago, but I can tell you one thing. In any 3-act structure, in any film, there is the beginning, there is the middle where there is a conflict, and towards the end there is some kind of
resolution.
Resolution or overcoming the obstacles or some kind of satisfaction that you are selling to the audience.
Right.
Zodiac is a kind of film when there is Ghanta at the end. Okay.
And
in spite of that, it is brilliant.
Exactly.
In spite of that, it is brilliant.
Topic and
I can tell you 5 movie names which have screwed up the last part like anything, but let's not go there.
Yeah.
Okay. When an audience invests
3 hours,
like 2.5 or 3 hours or 2 hours of his time, he wishes to have some kind of emotional payoff.
Of course. Yeah.
There has to be some satisfaction.
You don't want
in Zodiac,
you don't know who did it, right?
They could have fictionalized, they could have done something, some ray of hope, but he just showed a middle finger and said, that's all.
That's all.
In tera cinema cut.
To be honest, when I first watched Zodiac, I didn't like it. I mean, I think I'm one of those few people who thought, kya hai? I mean, just because you're David Fincher, you cannot just leave it like that, right? Why don't you just put up somebody, caught, or the Arthur Lee Allen, just fictionalize him and show him that he's caught. What difference could have made? It could have only elevated the, experience, right? I thought that, but I think after that, I read the screenplay and I read the script breakdown and I watched it twice after that. I think it's just something brilliant. Zodiac, I think, with repeated views, gets into you. I mean, you will become Jake Gyllenhaal after a point, so obsessed with knowing the truth. Eventually, you cannot find it. Your only moment of satisfaction is when Jake Gyllenhaal encounters Arthur Lee Allen in that shop, that's when you feel, "Hammaya, this
Come
is
on, something okay, something
something
pura
is
bhai
there."
bolke.
So
And that also I'm sure David Fincher said that bolke he just chiller badesnattu, he will just like throwing chiller, he just satisfied you
I
somehow.
think I think it's not easy. It's not easy to convince producers or production houses to go with that approach until you have lots of guts and you are David Fincher, or either you are Bong Joon-ho, who did Memories of a Murder. Even in Memories of Murder, it just leaves it open ended.
See, it takes a lot of guts to do that. First of all, it takes
Definitely.
guts.
Yep.
First, you need to be a great guy. There is no doubt about it. But to come up with such a conviction for that subject with no proper ending, you need lots of guts. You need amazing amounts of confidence. And beyond that, you need convincing power to,
Yeah.
convince a studio,
Right.
financer, saying that producer will ask you, Indra bhai, ఇది ఏమైతుంది last level ke.
అరే అట్లీస్ట్ నాకైనా చెప్పురా నేను ఇన్ని డబ్బులు పెడుతున్నా.
At least, so there are very few people who have been very successful at closing stories with an open end.
Open ended.
All right, I'm not talking about finally in the end somebody becomes the ghost. No, I'm
No.
talking about movies not having an end actually. And Clint Eastwood is an expert in that.
Yeah.
In $1 Million Baby,
Oh man.
she dies.
She dies.
That's it. And still he carried on the film till the end, man. That is not a joke. That is some amazing levels of confidence, and that is a brutal talent. That is, it requires brutal talent.
That made me cry. I think $1 Million Baby is one of those.
And his latest movie about that Atlanta Olympics, blast movie.
Richard Jewell, right? Richard Jewell.
Yeah, Richard Jewell.
Richard Jewell.
Or Robert Jewell. Richard Jewell.
Richard Jewell.
Even in that, somehow, I am satisfied, but the ending is still loose.
I think that's the difference between a great filmmaker and an ordinary filmmaker, because a great filmmaker has that conviction and that honesty towards the subject, that he knows that this is the right way. I mean, I firmly and honestly sincerely believe that this is going to be the way, and I don't need any gimmicks or anything to just sideline it and make it, this way. So yeah, I mean, that needs a lot of guts, and I don't know how he convinced studios. Maybe after a point when you become successful, you have a word, but I think initially coming up with such a stuff, it's very difficult.
Yeah. So so that was that. So next film I want to talk about is Girl with a Dragon Tattoo.
Yeah.
Now the thing about this film is, because I didn't like that film. Okay, maybe there are some great things about it, because there are certain things that repel you. Okay, I found that character very repulsive. Okay, and she may be a great person and she may be a great hacker, but somehow the look, that entire characterization, it was designed like that.
Yeah.
And I'm still saying that it could be my inadequacy that I'm not able to appreciate it enough.
Yeah.
But still, I can tell you one small thing about this film. When I just started writing, 2009-10 onwards, I used to write short stories on blogs, and my first book had just was about to come out. And those days, those days are much later, I think. I always saw that the Girl with Dragon Tattoo, the novel, was always tagged up in Lifestyle, Shopper Stop, Walden. Anywhere you go, there were like thousands of copies. That was like a bestseller at that time.
Yeah.
And then this movie came. So tell us about this film.
As you said, I mean, the subject of choice is, it's not everybody's cup of tea, definitely. I mean,
as it is evident now. Yeah.
Very dark, and it gets you, it makes you very uncomfortable in some parts, especially in the middle phase when you are following the Rooney Mara's character. But what I liked in Dragon Tattoo was his usage of color, the bluish greenish color he uses throughout the film, which makes you feel so cold, like you are actually in that environment following these characters. And I think performances wise, I really like Rooney Mara's performance and Daniel Craig's performance, but it was more of like an Agatha Christie's whodunit,
Yeah,
the way it
who
unfolded.
done it kind of a.
And I basically personally like whodunits. So maybe I was, towards that. But yeah, Dragon Tattoo, it's, I think you need to give it a little bit of time, to understand, or to like it. Sometimes you might not like it immediately, but when you watch it peacefully, you get into that. But it actually follows the same standard David Fincher cinematic techniques.
Okay,
follow
okay,
follow the act. Don't move the camera until you don't want to. Use precise close-ups, precise insert shots. Use color, low-key lighting, and that's it. Let your actors perform. And that makes you. There's some really really I sometimes I forward few scenes. I don't know, like, this very, it gets very uncomfortable watching.
I think that was the entire purpose of making that
Yeah, exactly.
film.
Right.
The the character itself is like that, and some
Right.
you just
Yeah. The
can't do
way
anything about it.
the way she was, her costumes are designed, her makeup and all. The amount of CG he uses in, simple stuff. Only when you see the behind the scenes, you'll notice how he has done that. It's. I don't think it's the greatest of Fincher's films, but it's something which you can study too if you are making a psychological thriller or who done it. That's the approach you can try to see. How usual whodunits are a different way, but this is in a totally different spectrum. He chose us to do it, like more of a dark whodunit kind of stuff. Yeah.
Nice. So, social network, we already spoke about that. Now I'm going to ask you a difficult question. Curious Case of Benjamin Button.
Yeah.
Is it Fincher's misfire?
Honestly, I'm not a big fan of Curious Case of Benjamin Button. I watch it, but if you give me an option to watch any of other Fincher's films, I would gladly take other one. I respect.
What went wrong?
I think the length. I mean, it's too big, and sometimes towards the middle, I kind of lose track of, there's something happening. I don't know. I'm not very emotionally involved in Benjamin's character. I felt, so I don't know what others felt, but I think the way he recreates this whole setup, the production design of Benjamin Button is outstanding, right?
Correct.
If you want
I was about to say that.
yeah,
Art direction is top.
art direction
Every frame is awesome.
the frame is so beautifully lit up and so beautifully set up that you just want to learn something watching that movies. But personally, I am not a big fan of Benjamin Button, but outstanding performances by all the actors. But I don't know. I think it's not. Sometimes I feel it's not his cup of tea. Maybe he should.
He should just stick to what he does well, right?
Right?
काहे पे रहे हो सब अपने को बोल के
Yeah.
छोड़ देना.
That's more of like. I felt more of like Spielberg stuff. Maybe Spielberg could have done more justice to that subject, and he does period.
Yeah, that's a very nice point. Spielberg could have made magic, done
No,
magic
like
there.
ripped it off. Like when you go do a period.
And Brad Pitt is the kind of an actor who is just fits into anything here. Nobody else could have done. See, whatever that film is, flopped or hit or whatever, Brad Pitt's part was brilliant. He is just outstanding in whatever he did.
But I
Old
want
guy,
to ask,
young guy, younger guy.
why do people don't think him as a great actor? I don't see people talking him as a great actor. People talk him as
No, he is A-lister. A-lister, boss.
No, yeah,
But,
you are a star, right? Star is a different. But
Star,
you
yes.
talk about you talk about DiCaprio, you talk about Kevin Spacey or other Anthony Hopkins,
George Clooney.
great actors, George Clooney. These are great actors, right? I would love to see him in that category, but I don't know. People actually see him as like most of a poster boy, good looking, this kind of stuff. But he's a brilliant actor. I mean, he's just terrific.
He's way too good looking for his own bad. Yeah. Had he been little less good looking, he would have, maybe.
Yeah,
Maybe there was a.
This is fascinating, right? This actor-director collaborations.
Yeah, I mean,
And Leonardo DiCaprio and Tarantino, or Al Pacino,
Scorsese.
or Robert De Niro and Scorsese, and you come to Brad Pitt. You take a David Fincher and Brad Pitt. That's a beautiful combination. You want to watch any day.
At least if there is Brad Pitt, then chalo, there is some comfort zone. But see, Brad Pitt is number one bankable star, if you ask me.
Yeah,
I think his last flop was few years ago. I don't know. There was one movie where there is Cameron Diaz and there is Brad Pitt and there is someone else also. Some movie 2014 it came and flopped. After that, I think every film of his has been a hit. So
yeah,
minimum bankability is there that you can, that you are assured of some,
correct.
adi, yeah,
But
that is,
yeah, that the thing I'm trying to say is people, not everyone categorizes him in the like Academy Award
yeah,
actor.
he is not counted among the best actors. That is true.
Yeah. But
That is
he's
100%
really
true.
good. I mean, and the fact that he convinced the studio for having Fincher, having Kevin Spacey in Seven, and to have that exact climax how Fincher wanted for a director who has not made an impact by then. That needs a good. I mean, that makes you feel that no, yeah, he has good script sense and he knows the vision of a director. Yeah, that's what I like about
And see, another great thing about Brad Pitt is the longevity. He's
it.
been around for a very long time. Yeah,
Right.
just as much as I think as Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise is 83 or 82 onwards. These guys also almost same. I mean, just a few years after that, I think. So these guys are like something else, man, and they have certain fixed combos. And definitely, Brad Pitt with David Fincher is. I'm looking forward to future movies with both of them
Yeah,
together.
those combinations are amazing. Yeah.
And before we switch to the other part of this discussion, I want to talk about Gone Girl once again.
Yeah.
Gone Girl is, what can I say? I think it is my favorite David Fincher film.
Yeah.
I will never be able to think of Rosamund Pike
Right.
as a gentle, nice woman, which she actually might be in real life. So tell us about your experience with Gone Girl.
I think again, I would categorize Gone Girl into the subject of deception again, just like Fight Club.
Pure
It's a
deception.
massive deception, right? And that's his zone. That's his, go to go to kind of a subject. And when when I watched that movie, I was like, okay, something is happening. It's going well. Movie is going well, and the kind of third act, the moment it gets into that aspect, it's an altogether a different film, and superb acting by both the male and female lead. I think Ben
And
Affleck was amazing. As much
amazing. And Neil Patrick Harris also. All
as
three of them.
I mean, I've never seen someone dying like that. I still have. I mean, I think that is such a disturbing scene, and
And the kind of crying she does for CCTV.
oh man, that the whole sequence.
Is,
He doesn't show crime on screen most of the time. David Fincher, if you observe, he actually shows the post-crime sequences, or he describes the scene through dialogue, the crime scene through dialogue. He rarely, stabs. Some parts in Zodiac, you have someone shooting someone or stabbing someone. But in Gone Girl, that scene with Patrick is.
oh my
It'll make
God.
you feel like by Avi Bhaskar. This is
So
something.
that film I had watched with my friends, and that day the last dialogue of the film, she says, "What have we done to each other? What will we do?" And suddenly screen goes black. It was directed by David Fincher, and end credit starts with that background music from Trent Reznor, Atticus Ross.
Right.
That music it kept haunting me for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
As soon as I came home, I downloaded that music and I just kept hearing that in my iPod. Those days, just crazy, crazy stuff. Then
Yeah. I think
for a very long time, there was that psychological impact. See,
Yeah.
when you watch a movie, there has to be some something you take from it. All right.
Right.
And some movies give you such haunting memories.
Right.
You will, I mean, I was just scared, man, for no reason. I had no idea what I was scared of, but I was scared. That
Because
is the,
because people get that feeling when you don't expect something from your female lead, who is such a good looking nice looking woman, and he turns her into something else towards the end, and the transition is so believable and so realistic that I think the one thing I want to talk about Gone Girl is the kind of editing he uses, the cuts he uses. If you break down all the scenes between Ben Affleck and Rosamund Pike, when they were good, when they were a happy couple, it's mostly smooth long takes, gets you nice and settled, and after that it just picks up the pace, and fast cuts happen, and you wouldn't even realize that you are already into something, that it does something to you. And again, the same techniques of I think I think I'm reiterating it a lot, but it's the same techniques, right?
same techniques here. It's the same thing. There are 5 to 8 things that he does correctly and does
Correctly.
brilliantly, and
he
that's all.
shows that.
All his movies can be described using those 5 to 8
Correct.
things. That's it.
And that small, minute camera movements that he's actually following the actor wherever he goes. Like, if I'm going this way, he'll go you this way. And some of the things he uses is to make you feel claustrophobic. He pans and he zooms at the same time. That is more like sucking the air out of the frame, and you feel like, whoa, something is
Sometimes I wonder what kind of pressure the cinematographer under Fincher is in.
something else. I mean,
Right. I think it's the most strenuous job on earth, if you ask me.
definitely. Cinematographer and editor.
What do you call Fincher's cinematographer and Tarantino's stunt master are always under extreme pressure. They're the most, that's the toughest job on earth, if you ask me.
Yeah, but I want to ask you one question. See, every filmmaker has their approach, right? Since you love Nolan, I want to bring up this question to you, because the approach of Nolan and Fincher is extremely opposite in terms of how they go about the film. Fincher, Nolan, he likes the film. He likes to shoot on film. He wants to shoot in the real location. He wants to actually, if he wants a cornfield, he will actually grow a cornfield kind of a guy, right?
He grew, yes.
He wants to go out there. Even if it's a space shuttle, he wants to build the entire thing and make the actors, be a part of it. Even on a film like Interstellar, I think Interstellar has a lot less CGI shots than a Social Network, if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
So the difference in approach, right? Other hand, you have another master who loves digital, because that's let him shoot as many times as he wants. Doesn't worry about the amount of stock he's burning. It just goes on with takes, and he uses CGI even for the minute of things, right? Even in the Social Network, when Mark is writing on the glass window, right? That's a CGI shot.
Yes, it is.
So what do you make out of these two filmmakers in terms of approach? It's like, it's like, if you give me the effect, I'm fine.
See, what we have to understand is Nolan's scripts are mostly original. They are not adapted from anywhere.
Okay.
For that, what happens is Nolan has no limitation. It is because either his or his brother's own script, in some cases. So what happens there is that he has immense amount of freedom to do whatever he wants.
Yeah.
All right. But whereas Fincher has to see, Social Network means he has to still stick to that book or the actual story.
Yeah.
Correct. So there are limitations, and within the purview of those limitations, he still chooses to use, CGI or more, more digitized kind. He has a more digitized style. Yeah. But if you look at the end products, you will feel that Nolan's movie is CGI, and this guy is like, where is the scope for any CGI?
Exactly. That's
right.
because
there are,
यहाँ पे पूरा CGI है and this is all real, but it's actually opposite.
it's the opposite. Yeah, because see, in Tenet also, he burned an entire plane here, 747 plane.
Right.
He bought that plane and burned. You know why? The prime reason is that it is more cost effective. CGI is very expensive these days.
It is, yeah.
If you shoot a film for 6 to 8 months, CGI will take 6 to 8 months.
Yeah.
For every shot, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 shots, they will need to process that and then put them together and then somehow, sync everything. So that extra work is eliminated. As it is, Nolan takes a lot of time in pre-production.
Right.
Okay, and Fincher takes a lot of time in post-production. Because the reason why Nolan takes a lot of time in pre-production is because the canvas that he lays for the story itself is very big.
Very huge. Yeah.
You understand?
Yeah.
No, Fincher is playing chess. Okay. Fincher is playing chess, but Nolan is also playing chess, but in a football field. You understand?
But so, what do you think it does to the actors? Why do you think actors are more comfortable on a real location or in a green mat?
See, actually, to the best of my knowledge, actors really don't care. They just have to surrender to what the director wants and they have to perform, to their best. Yeah. But I'm very sure that there are actors who complain about 99 retakes, 67 retakes, and 55 retakes. I'm sure everyone complains.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it's exhaustive, right? After a point, mentally exhaustive.
It is exhaustive because if you ask me to write one code, let's talk in coding terms. If you write one small method to sort, you use one algorithm and you do it. Then your boss comes and tell you don't use that. Then he will come and say don't use that and do this. Use bubble sort and this sort and that sort. In the end, what happens? You will lose interest and you will ask, "Ni came ka algebra bhai." Tell me what you want, I will do it. And see, at some point, you will lose interest in doing it, and your only motivation is to somehow finish and get out of it.
Yeah.
Okay. But these are professional actors. They are paid by the millions. They are supposed to do as many number of times.
Yeah.
Then Jesse Eisenberg can't say I will not do after 20 retakes. Means the studio will throw him out. There are legal implications.
You know what he says after 99th take? There is a making video. Jesse Eisenberg comes to Fincher and says, Fincher says, "Okay, guys, I think we are good. We are done. 99 take. Let's done." So like, "Okay, are we done?" He asked him twice. I think he cannot believe that it's actually done. But I think my observation or my take on this is the approach of more of CGI stuff is that Fincher, with his approach, with his more of like, music conductor kind of approach, like he wants to go everything as he wants to, right? So he needs a studio space with a less amount of set dressing. I'll do everything in post, get me the bare minimum things, 2 people sitting across a table, and that allows him to go for as many takes as he wants. If it is an exterior location or, where the weather is changing, everything is changing and people are coming and going, it's not easy to control that. I think he finds more control on his craft when it is CGI stuff. That's what I observed.
And there is one more point I wanted to add. When Fincher makes a film, he makes sure it is perfect.
Yeah.
When Nolan makes a film, he doesn't care if it is perfect. He just wants to create a wonder.
Yeah.
And that's where these two people are, completely
different. I think the approach more to do with their internal personality as well, right?
That's just personality. Yeah. So yesterday I shared a popular quote from Nolan. He said that honey, you should be able to dream something bigger. So everything is none of his films are perfect. Nolan's films are not perfect at all. If you sit and think about Inception for 2 to 3 hours, you will find out 100 flaws. But those flaws are what make that film beautiful.
Yeah, I think that's one. If at all there is a little complaint, even though I'm a David Fincher fan, what do you say if you want to talk anything negative about him. I think that obsession for perfection, it's more like his films are every film is an extension of a filmmaker. In some
Correct.
aspect, like if you see a K. Vishwanath film, it's an extension of his personality, right?
Personality.
Yeah. So it comes from internally. So I think with this very well orchestrated stuff and obsessive stuff, he's too perfect sometimes. I mean, I like this tinge of maybe a little bit of spontaneity or some little imperfection you do expect, right? But sometimes he's too perfect, man.
I know.
Yeah.
So that was David Fincher and his exploits on the big screen. And
Yeah.
before we close, I would like to spend 3-4 minutes talking about his exploits on the small screen.
Correct. Yeah.
So he had a very big hand in making House of Cards for Netflix.
Yeah.
And then he also made Mindhunter.
Right.
All right. And so not just on the large screen, but also on the small screen, he is a gem. House of Cards was one of the most perfect TV shows, best political drama until season 3, season 4.
Yeah.
When it first came out, I binged on everything and finished everything like morning to evening. I finished everything. Then the mark, what do you call the trademark Fincherism, if I'm allowed to use that word, Fincherism was so distinctly visible.
Yeah.
And especially given the fact that small screen writing and big screen writing and direction are completely different things.
Right.
In small screen, you have to interlace many times. You watched many TV serials, from your childhood, even your ETV, Gemini TV, Telugu serials, right? Every episode consists of 6 parts. Each part will have 2-3 characters interacting.
Right.
And then somehow you have to match. So even in that kind of a setup, he is a magician.
Yeah. I think especially with Mindhunter, that's his field, right? That crime.
Boss, that guy, when he holds him by the neck like this, I was about to die.
And, no. I think the most dreadful scene was when he does this. The Ed Kemper does this to that guy, like here, just beneath it. I think Mindhunter. It's so sad, such a pity that the season 3 is not coming. The reason being there is not enough viewership for Mindhunter for the kind of budget it is expecting. Maybe down the line 5 years they might, because they already have the lot of subject matter.
If somebody has a brain, they should pick it up and make it, somehow. And let keep Netflix aside. Somebody should, pick it up and. There many times it happens, right? Different networks pick up already existing TV shows and they do a good job of it.
Criminal psychology, and in the whole 2 seasons, he never shows you a crime.
That is the beauty.
He never ever.
That is the beauty.
And
see, go ahead.
Yeah. So, and it's just these insane, very dangerous people talking in a very light tone, which actually makes you feel, man, this is something else.
And they are talking about murder.
In a
sitting throats. Oh my God!
In such a casual.
If you notice in Mindhunter, before the episode begins, in the cold open, they show a parallel, story of one serial killer in the making, who is actually a guy.
That's BTK killer, right?
Yeah, so that whole thread, somehow you feel that for those 5 minutes up, I think this should be the main thing, and then it jumps to something more.
It's to something else, and that's what I was more very eager for season 3, because I was thinking that they would close. Actually, they closed the BTK killer. Like this FBI behavioral unit actually cracked the case using whatever the theory they have developed to track this guy and get him. So I was actually waiting for that, but as you very well said, right, he teases you with that prelude of BTK.
Teasing colossal master, boss, ultimate.
And actually does nothing. BTK killer doesn't do anything. He actually, you see him with a rope You see him with a car. You see him inside his house.
Yeah, burning trash and
Yeah,
like
burning,
that.
and he's just amazing. Yeah.
So when I was studying intermediate, there was this. So where the place where I studied, the maths, physics, and chemistry lecturers were coded M1, M2, M3 like that. For different batches, different professors used to come. So M1 in that was like the founder of that college and was a very top ek number ka matlab number one maths teacher of that time. I'll not name anyone, but he had a specialty. He used to teach entire complex numbers chapters.
Mhm.
Complex numbers, right? He used to teach entire complex numbers without saying A plus IB. You understand? Complex number can be expressed as A plus IB, where I is
Right.
under root minus
Yeah.
1.
Imaginary. Yeah.
That he had that specialty. That was his record, that he used to teach the whole complex numbers without saying A plus IB even once.
Yeah.
When I grew up, I saw Mindhunter and I have David Fincher,
Right.
who shows the entire season of Mindhunter without actually
showing a
showing the
crime.
crime.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
On that note, thank you, Hemant, very much for joining today. Screeniversity Talks will continue to bring more discussions about cinema, TV shows, and things like that. So thank you, Hemant, once again for joining. All right. So if you guys have not done it yet, please subscribe and like my channel. Like this video and subscribe to this channel, or click the bell icon or whatever they say. and if you like this video, these discussions, please do share. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Bye.